question was, is there anybody doing anything with title work and blockchain? And I seem to recall you may have mentioned the title process.
Yeah, I think title on blockchain is being done by Proffitt, one of the earlier people in the space that did not jump into the financial part of real estate transactions, but really just the logging of them. I think Proffitt's been in that, and I think Proffitt also female founded and was recently invested in by Tim Draper and Draper Ventures. So I think they're doing that.
Great. So Proffitt was the name of that firm if anyone's interested in looking into it. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on in blockchain and specifically as it relates to facilitating transparency in real estate transactions? That's been a big topic so far for us.
Yeah, well, so being early often looks a lot like being wrong. I made the jump into blockchain early when it comes to real estate. So by real estate standards, I've been doing this since 2016. And not a lot of traction back then. A lot of people excited about crypto, thinking about diversifying their portfolios, realized they'd had a run and they weren't sure what to do with all of that, but they nothing really could take off. And hats off to Proffitt actually for going, you know what, that's a little too nascent. We're just going to do the first forays. We're going to get title in the blockchain, and we're going to start in that direction. And also Deedcoin was an early partner of ours. They were also doing, they were incentivizing people with a specific coin that would put their deeds in the blockchain, and they would also get a refund or a rebate back to their deed title filing people or whoever. It was a whole big thing trying to insert yourself, this crypto stuff, into the blockchain world, or into the real estate world was very difficult. So I decided to just really focus on how to lower the threshold for entry into real estate investing. I just thought it was absurd that I could go onto E-Trade and I could put $10 into Apple, not know anything about how it's managed, who's in charge, what they're doing. They're certainly not accountable to me, really. And maybe make some money if they make money, and maybe not. But I couldn't do that in my neighborhood. And as an artist, which is what I was doing for 20 years before blockchain, I was always in those neighborhoods that were gentrifying, right? I was the early gentrifier. First it's like the artists and the gays, and then they push on people of color, or the people who've always lived there, whoever they are. And then eventually the white middle class people come with their baby strollers, and that's where all the money comes in. And then, of course, then the artists move on to the next place. So I always knew if I could only invest in the neighborhoods that I wanted to live in, they were going to be appreciating. And there was no way to do that. So I was always looking at how to model that, how to formulate it, how to put things in place on the smart contract side, as well as the business use case. And then that led me down to bigger and bigger projects and wanting to have larger implementations that weren't just in appreciating neighborhoods, but also some planned communities, and ultimately building a platform that just does syndication of money. We saw a lot of market capture opportunity in the boutique broker-dealer space. I went and got my securities licenses so I could be super compliant, because at some point you cross that threshold from being a real estate transaction to a securities transaction. So I just wanted to really know all my bases and not be able to, be shut out of a room because I didn't know that specific aspect of it.
How many people in the room know what a smart contract is when we refer to that? Is that... Okay, great. We don't need to explain that. What about understanding the sailing or tokenization of investment capital? Is that something we should dive into?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's drill down there.
Okay, great. So I pretty much, when I explain what tokenizing anything is, and in this case we're just going to keep it to hard assets that have an actual quantifiable number to them, so these aren't completely speculative. I just say, I tell people that are frightened of crypto and the whole thing, they're like, that's just crazy. I'm like, we're just going to digitize the transaction. So a lot of times if I want to be able to use blockchain technology or promote it, and part of the team gets it and part of the team doesn't, I'll say, we're going to be using technology to digitize this. And they get that. That's like using DocuSign to them, which actually it should be about the same as using DocuSign, right? You own these shares, you have a house fire, you have your paperwork in your safe, it's not a fireproof safe, it burns up, and we can probably figure out how to reissue those shares and do that. And that's something that the federal government requires that we're able to do, so that things don't get completely lost on a ledger, which is where a lot of blockchain purists get a little hung up, frankly, and for good reason. But it still ends up being like a way to just digitize and therefore make easier and less, more immutable a transaction. So the more people can see it, more people can verify it, it can't get lost as easily, and hopefully it can also get transferred more easily.
So what does that mean when regulators require that you've moved something to a digitized platform, and you have to be able to recreate the paper version of it. What impact does that create for, in specifically real estate? Like, do you have an example of a deal or a transaction where something like that's had to happen?
I think when you're talking about digitizing anything, it's sort of like hitting the print screen button, right? Like we need to get that in paper. I think that's not the difficulty. The real difficulty that comes with in terms of issuing shares on the blockchain specifically, and this could be the case even not on the blockchain, but this one just came up in the other room, so I'll kind of bring it up again now. In the blockchain, if you have just, say a $1 million property and you have 1 million shares and they're in 1 million wallets, or they're in 10 wallets and they're split up, whatever, and somebody loses their wallet, like he has one of them and he has a will and his 2 kids get the money, then whatever is his money, but he has these wallets and goes out and gets hit by a car and he's gone, but his kids are like, but he owns the property, and the kid, we have to figure it out, right? I mean, the blockchain isn't going to solve every single problem. But it does give us a way to digitize and track all of that and know, yes, we're going to have to probably burn and reissue these shares to be able to make this up. And yes, there will need to be some sort of a consensus or a centralized governing body that can deal with that. Oftentimes that can even be adjudicated. But usually speaking, without extenuating circumstances such as, inheritance law and like blockchain tokenized real estate law coming together, typically it's going to be something that just makes things work more easily. And I think one way of looking at the flaws, some of the places where blockchain needs to be mitigated simply to have more of a broad use case that can be, say, replicated or reissued when it's needed. It's kind of like when the first wave of the internet came, it was the internet of communication. This is the second wave of the internet, in my opinion. It's the internet of finance. And so all these transactions we're talking about, we have a lot of regulation that almost strangleholds it when you talk about FINRA regulations. But with the first wave of the internet, it was communication. We have very few laws. Freedom of the press, and don't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's about it. And now we have fake news as a problem, and like people pretending to be things that they're not, and all these, saying lies or whatever. So we don't have any regulation around it. Or we don't know what to do. So the technologies come, and we've needed to sort of patch it up with other things that will hopefully mitigate it and make it better than just the pure technology of communication. And that's, I think, the same thing when it comes to blockchain technology, distributed ledgers, and all of the wonderful opportunities that are here for us to be more interconnected and interdependent in a financial way, not just in a communicative way. That's still going to need to be paired up and patched up in some places, and that's exactly one of them. Where there potentially is a loss of, but a trackable loss of a token of some sort, or an asset that's held by somebody who, say, passes away or loses something.
So, do you have some actual transactions you've walked through on your platform? Could you walk us through one of those transactions, what that looks like, taking a piece of real estate and moving it on to blockchain?
Yeah, so
can everybody hear me okay? Sorry, I was looking at her. So I asked for her to walk us through an actual transaction, a piece of real estate that she's put on her platform, and what that process looks like and who participates in that process.
So your question is like kind of twofold. One's operational, and one really has to do with marketing. And the place that I've focused the most for the platform itself is the marketing, because the operations, people understand. If you know crypto, you know smart contracts. You're not reinventing any wheel to go find the perfect chain or whatever. Yes, ERC 1440s are better than ERC 20s for lots of reasons. We can get into that. Who really cares? Ultimately, that will keep iterating on its own. The technologists will take care of it. How are we going to talk about this and make it an easy interface for people to engage? That's the most important thing, I think, for getting massive user adoption. So to go through one particular transaction, here's an easy one. I was really attracted to this company in LA. They're a hybrid of a nonprofit for-profit. They're super impact related. They're trying to do adaptive reuse because of the type of zoning in parts of LA where you can take a big house and cut it into a multifamily without any maintenance. Great. You can cut out a big house into like a multifamily without a lot of trouble. Like things just suddenly had a zoning switch, and so this company decided that was how they were going to make not completely micro housing, but more affordable housing for people. So they first were like, we want our investors in our company to help us buy this. I think it was a $1.3 million property. We're going to put $200 into it to renovate it, so it's like a $1.5 million property. And then it's going to become a fourplex where we're going to have these other nonprofits come in, and they're going to do these things to subsidize rent, blah, 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 blah. But it's basically going to be listed once for our investors to invest in this $1.5 million project. And we're going to show them how they'll make their money. And then we're going to cut it apart, and the people that move in, we're going to relist it to them and say, hey, if you want to put $100 to $1,000 into this property that you live in, will be the way for you to invest that money. And anybody in your family or in your neighborhood. And they were able to scale that out just a bit. So we took the same property and we actually listed it twice because we had two different interested parties. The second one took out the first. Has that transaction totally completed? No. Has it taken over the entirety of the equity or the leveraged equity? No. But that was the way that we structured the deal for them. And what we ultimately used, and I think if it's not broken, don't fix it. Operationally speaking, it's really just a matter of using a simple GP-LP structure or SPV or a series LLC structure, LLP structure. Those structures already exist. You can use those as your contractual structures and then just build your smart contracts and your transactions on top of that. It's really just giving a thin digital kind of veneer over a pretty good operational system that just needed more technology to make it more frictionless and go faster and include more people.
Anything else you want to share with us before we open up for questions? I know there's a lot of questions, so I want to...
Bring the questions. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it, okay. What you were just explaining, and I probably did not understand it right, so you can go over it. It almost sounded like we were talking about a REIT.
Yes. So I think the way that the best way to learn is to start with what you say it's just like something and then expand it. I try to use metaphor and simile as much as possible when teaching something because nobody likes learning new information. It makes you feel uncomfortable. You go into a new space. You have to be brave to go like, I'm going to learn a new thing. Because otherwise, stay in your lane. Stay with what you know. You'll always be an expert, right? But to go try to learn something else, it's like you want to always say, it's just like this, but with this extra thing on it. So you're right. It's like a REIT that's property specific, if you're going to use a REIT analogy. Because a REIT is what you're using REIT as the way to say you can bring in lots of investors to co-invest, right? So REIT's one way to do that. The reason why this is better than a REIT in the traditional sense is that REITs actually have so many fees involved in them that there actually was legislation passed to require REIT managers to actually give a set amount of profit back to their investors because they were just throwing in management fees here and there and just chipping away at these people's money because they didn't know any better vehicle than a REIT. So on the blockchain, something more transparent with tokenization, that would be a lot easier not only to catch, but also to curtail. And you could even plug it into the smart contract and not be able to exist in the first place. So you really do cut out a lot of potential management fees.
To dip in and to dip out too as well, right? Awesome.
Yeah. Great question.
Other questions?
Yeah, in terms of, let's say, like a GPLP partnership that we were talking about, one thing that Hiro mentioned before was, like, for example, the issue that there is with regulation for that. Like, how difficult would it be to tokenize investment, and specifically like an investment, a real estate syndication?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about tokenizing, you are basically making a digitized syndication.
Okay.
That's really what it is.
So you end
right?
up operating under like a crowdfunding regulation or Reg A offering?
Oh, in terms of the regulations, it would depend on who your investors were and how large the offering was. If it was, you either use Regulation CF, which is it's just now got raised up to $5 million, and you can go after retail investors, but that's how big the entire fund can be. You can do an offering that can be much, much larger under Reg D, and there's a couple of exemptions for Regulation D. One of them limits the number of unaccredited investors to 35. The other one leaves it more open, but there's a few like specifics on those, and it just depends who you want to go after and for what. And Reg A, which is I am a big fan of in theory, but I have seen very, very few projects actually make it through with the rigorous Reg A process. And usually it just costs the cost of capital to run a Reg A is still so enormously high. And it's like blockchain has solved this problem, but the rest of the world, the business use cases have to catch up. And one of the things that's not catching up is the behemoth of, and I'm actually a big fan of government, but like the behemoth of big government saying like, we have to put you through this complete colonoscopy for, several months for you to run that Reg A. And we're going to call it protection. And I'm like, it's not. You're just trying to starve out anybody who wants to reach a retail investor. But over time, enough of those will get through. There's going to be a systematization that's going to have to be. So we're just in the early times, like pushing kind of on those gates of the castle.
Would, and if it would, how would tokenizing real estate be able to prevent, I think, one of the biggest financial risks people have in real estate, which is fraud. You know, yeah, deals sometimes go sideways, but most of the time when I see people lose money, somebody took it.
Someone lied.
Yeah. How do we address that?
You know, there's always going to be user error, right? I mean, we have computers, and then computers break, and then you find out, no, you just didn't do it right. And so, you know, we're humans. We're still out to steal from each other. People still do bad stuff. They'll use whatever tools at their disposal. They'll use a knife, they'll use a fountain pen, they'll use a keyboard. So if someone's out to steal your money, they're out to steal your money. I think the more third-party checks and balances that are in there, the less likely you can just get excited, swept away, trust the wrong person, and give them your money. That's great. But, you know, it's almost like the more sterile the environment gets, the more technologically driven the environment gets, the more likely you are to have some red flag caught in some way that could have slipped by you otherwise. And that's a good thing. I don't think that blockchain can stop fraud, but my best analogy for how blockchain can solve a lot of issues around fraud or contesting transactions is like if I sold you a car for $1,000, my shitty car, and you take it, and then I get $1,000, you take my car, and then I go back and I'm like, hey, you stole my car, give me my car. And you're like, no, I have this piece I didn't sign that. This is your signature. No, it doesn't look like my signature at all. And I change my signature. And I'm like, now I've just tied up your time, right? Or you now have to go back and figure out how you're going to prove that this happened. But if I sell you my car in front of all of these people, and I come back and say you stole my car, all these people are going to be like, no, you didn't. I was there. And that's what blockchain does. It puts all of the transactions in the town square for everyone to see. And it's really hard. How can I go back and change every single one of these minds to believe somehow through Jedi mind trick that I didn't sell you my car, right? So that's where the fraud can be.
Great. Another question?
I guess I'll ask one. So, for clarification, before I go into the question, I guess, are you, with the tokenized real estate assets, is that allowing for fractional ownership then? Okay. How does the, I guess, sale of, fractions work? Does it have to be upon an exit of, everyone kind of like anonymously agreeing on it? Or can people kind of liquidate out early? Or what is the mechanism for that in regards to fractional ownership?
That's a great question. So I don't know how many of you have worked with kind of like a syndicate or a family office or some groups of guys that get together and want to buy stuff. You have an investor group. There's maybe 5 people in a group, and they go, we're going to go and get that apartment building and this thing over here in this strip mall. And they do these things together, and all 5 of them kind of know how it's going to work. But then one of them gets divorced, and he kind of like sells half of it to his wife, or maybe she has to sell him back, or something has to happen, and people have to just work it out amongst themselves, right? So these questions aren't unique to tokenization. I'm just mentioning that example because that happens in real estate, right? When there's multiple investors. And of course the banks, there's a lending component too. Our bank's gonna be freaked out about one of the 5 guys in the group or whatever, and how do you get the lending? Okay, you need to have good lending partners. If anybody wants to be a crypto-friendly lender in real estate, you will be the golden egg and the golden goose in this room. But in terms of making blockchain the way to solve that, you can't have written into those contracts, the ways that dilution can happen, right? So that it doesn't have to be re-met upon and re-met upon and re-met upon. It can be as far forward as you want to think. You can put it into a contract and make the rules clear so that there can't actually be transfer of assets under certain conditions. That's possible. That's just the nature of a smart contract. But aside from it being smart contract specific, really it's that the difference here with fractional ownership is, aside from, and also taxation, where you'd probably want to have things locked up for a year because of short-term capital gains issues and all of that. Okay, fine. The people have to be locked up for a certain period of time for basic rules. But in general, to then be able to have that liquidity, a smart contract and a tokenized asset will actually be easier to track between people that hold it than if it was that you owned your shares and you got drunk in a bar and met a guy and you're like, I'll sign over 75 shares to you, and you kind of legally can do that. It's your signature, but if it was in your wallet, it would be more obvious, clear, clean, and it would either be possible technologically or not based on the rules of our smart contract. So again, it's only as good as how well you think it through at the outset and how well you can amend it if needed, but it also is so much more clear because it's in front of a group of people, meaning on the blockchain, and in a commons in that sense. It can't be done in private where someone could say it never happened. and that's another part of, like, I think the security that comes with it.
So who's ever lost a deed in a poker game? Don't do that again.
I had a question about the Oracle problem. Have you explored that much at all as far as like taking off-chain assets like real estate and accurately representing them on blockchain? Because a lot of people say, oh, it's on the blockchain, it's just immutable ledger, it's so great.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're looking at a hard asset that's like in this analog world and you're trying to digitize it, again, I think it comes down to user error and having to come up with your specifics. When you say the Oracle specifically, I mean, the Oracle meaning, like, is there one source of data for that data that gets onboarded, or is there going to be multiple? And there has been talk around, how valuations could someday in the future be, and I'm not saying that this is like what I'm working towards, but I think it's interesting when you start fleshing out the possibilities of this technology. What if, rather than, I came in and you were talking about appraisals and how it was quite centralized. The appraisers work for the bank. There might be some, let's just say, collusion that goes on there. And the more diversified your Oracle is, meaning that your information sources, potentially the more trusted they are, which is why, we can trust the blockchain because it's hyper diversified and everybody either sees it happen or they don't. So if you could have, 8 people from the neighborhood come through, or like, if you could have there are ways that you could probably get more information in from more diverse places that have fewer kind of vested interests to falsify. And I think that there's a lot of room for people to be looking at governance that way. I mean, governance is the biggest part of what got me interested in blockchain to begin with. I was like, wait a minute, this is democracy but without a government? This is incredible, Yeah. Oh, question.
We already knew this stuff.
Will you speak up a little bit? They're being loud.
It's called this cryptocurrency stuff, but right now I'm working in like traditional lending. So I'm just really having a really hard time grasping how since you buy a property in Bitcoin, like, or in some cryptocurrency, like, how would you ever be able to get leverage on that? Like, borrowing, like, you have to go through traditional, investors, like government loans, like Fannie Mae. How would that even work?
So I think that what you're saying is basically the way that this would be structured with multiple people on the equity side, multiple investors on the equity side, that could scare off a lender. And that's true. That's more of a business use case question than it is a technology question. The technology's there, it's built, it can happen. I would love to see people go, okay, you know what, I don't want to invest in real estate and be like a risky equity investor. I take my risk in crypto, I want a really stable thing. Bonds suck anyway, so I'm going to do lending. Let's do a bond fund, like a Puerto Rico lending bond fund. We're going to have a standard 4% return on it. And it's going to be low, and it's going to be conservative, and it's going to be bedrock solid, and we will now lend to our own people. That would be awesome. I would love to see that happen for the people of Puerto Rico as well as the new expats. Be fantastic. There's my little, there's one of the soapboxes I can get on. But ultimately, traditional lenders are frightened of it. Traditional government is frightened of it. The whole thing is new, and it takes, it's like, I'm trying to think of like a similar, who would be frightened of the first wave of the internet? Well, print media. They lost because technology came and took their world from them. And that's what's happening here. And so,
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you remember like iTunes?
More violent governments.
Like with
When's the last
iTunes
time
and
you bought a
downloading
CD?
music, Napster. Anybody remember Napster?
Oh yeah! I should have been in jail over that.
Shouldn't we all?
What companies have made the biggest inroads to blockchain taking over title insurance? Title insurance, obviously, ripe for disruption. All it is a historical record, whether it's a notary in a Spanish country like Puerto Rico is, or in Spain, or in America, where all title insurance is a historical record per property that can be easily blockchained, and the whole entire industry could go away
It goes
because
away
it's
completely.
insurance that's not needed.
It's paid
All
over
it
and over
is
and over and
historical
over. I
record.
know.
So who
Yeah.
has tried it and who's been most successful?
So, okay, from what I understand, I've not tried it, but I think actually probably that's part of what they're kind of in a foray into. Not that they're out to like kill businesses right away, but like clearly by putting titles on the blockchain, title insurance is right there. I think that's probably their first monetization play. To once and for all do it and be done. But, so you guys know the whole title insurance issue, right? Like people pay it over and over and over, and it's absolutely ridiculous. It's the biggest, it's fraud, it's terrible. It's like, being forced to do, like, pay for things you don't need. So, what I've heard, though, from people that have tried to use any technology intervention, it's sort of like the same roadblocks that people are coming up against when they use blockchain for HIPAA compliance in the healthcare space. There are so many micro systems for each county, each city, each sub-city, neighborhood, all these things, like where people are actually logging their title and they're holding title insurance and title insurance is issued. All these things are so specific to the regions, just like in healthcare. HIPAA compliance and networking, who's there and how they share and what they do and da-da-da. It's all very specific to the hospital or the network provider that it's very hard to penetrate at scale. And so, I mean, it's a very nascent space. You pointed out exactly this needs to be disrupted. It's just that it's a tough one. And also the carrot at the end of that stick isn't huge.
What if, I mean, so if that happens and you upload all the title history for all time, title insurance exists because someone in the process didn't do something they were supposed to do, right? Like there was a loan made and someone didn't file, or there was where someone did something they weren't supposed to do, like forge a signature for the transfer or something. So if everything's in the blockchain, and forgive my lack of vocabulary here, but going back to the data entry question before, if somebody makes a loan and doesn't enter it on the blockchain, wouldn't you still need title insurance for that human error? Isn't that what they're insuring against? It's not that you're insuring against the title from seller A to seller B when seller C is buying a transaction. What you're insuring is from seller B to seller C that no mysterious issues in recording or lien or clouds have happened since the last time title insurance was issued. You're not paying for the past insurance, you're paying for that time in between.
Yeah.
Couldn't that still happen on blockchain if someone doesn't upload the data correctly and
It might, I mean, upon first upload, but I think once it's up, it's up, right? I mean, once it's held in a place, it's held in a place. So it's not like it'll be I mean, it's possible. To me, it seems the bigger issue is that there's this big boogeyman sitting there going, "Boo! You need title insurance. You just don't know." And they were like, "We have the blockchain. We kind of do know. Don't we kind of know now?" And I mean, eventually, I think over time, this adoption, it'll be like, "Yeah, boo! I'm not scared of your Model T, car anymore either." Like, I think it's that.
any other questions? All right, we're gonna go down this rabbit hole then a little.
Okay. Good.
When you have a question,
Yeah,
just interrupt us.
I have a comment.
Oh, great, yeah.
I just wanted to say, like, a lot of the things you guys have been talking about, I think a good example is when you brought up the internet and print media being afraid. But now people realize that they can blog and they can create their own media outlets. So it's not necessarily that people need to be afraid. They need to just realize that there are going to be new ways that they can do things so that nobody's actually losing. More people can win this way. And if you show people how they can win, there's going to be much more buy-in, and that's how you get people to do all of these things and make it all work.
Oh yeah, no, it's not people are afraid. It's the industries that used to
Industries,
hold.
people, corporations, all of it.
Yeah, right.
So I want to ask a question related to that. It's like there are these kind of like entrenched interests who want to keep things private, like you talked about earlier. It's my order book. I'm my own MLS, and blockchains bring about radical transparency. There's this conversation that's anonymous. It's really not. It's pseudo-anonymous. It's all public.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges with anything blockchainized, unless you're running a private blockchain, which is really not a blockchain at all. Like, how do you help overcome the entrenched interests who actually often have the backing of the monopoly creation of the violent governments to say, we're not going to allow you to do this because of regulations? How do we get past their hindrance to this? They don't want this to happen because it disrupts their industry in a way that all these different third-party kind of risk and like middlemen get to take a cut. They become not relevant anymore. And especially here in Puerto Rico, I hear often about there's so many layers of, you can call it bureaucracy, you can call it corruption, you can call it whatever you want, that they don't want to see innovation. They don't want to see efficiencies. They don't want to see innovation because it's like, makes them irrelevant. I mean, like, how do we overcome that when really...
Your question is kind of age old. I mean, I can think it all the way back to, well, not all the way back, it's not that long ago, but like the revolution from an agrarian system with aristocratic, control throughout the countryside of the United Kingdom into the industrialized revolution, right? And so industrial revolution, there was such a movement there. Even just before industrialization came, it was still a huge movement from like, who was working the land, what for, why did they have this monarchy, why was the aristocracy in place in every single province and every single town? And they would always tell themselves, we make jobs. I'm like, God, that's just what all of the corporate people I hear know. They make jobs. It's so nice of them to do that. you know. But like they had a problem with it, and yet the economy itself shifted, and the need and our relationship to goods and services on its own shifted. That like it eventually just came, right? We didn't have to believe it to be more righteous for it to occur. We had to see that it was more efficient, and eventually those beliefs had to change. Yes, we still have like these people that sit in a palace in like, you know, in the UK that they're like a royal family or whatever. But like they're the last vestige of that whole idea. Like it's, and they're just holding on to an idea, and they know they're an idea. They're like, we don't actually run the government. We're not allowed to. But thanks so much for letting us like sit on gilded toilets. Like I don't understand why it's still happening, but that's how slowly people will change their belief systems. What I love about blockchain is that it just accelerates the other thing. I don't have to make a moral plea to you that we should be governing ourselves, and that I think your voice matters as much as my voice matters, not any more or less than Barack Obama's. I think all of us can do better together. We don't need leaders to the same degree that we have needed leaders. Will that happen overnight? No. Do we have the answers? No. But do we have the technology to let us start having the conversations to work it out amongst ourselves? Yeah, and that's really cool. So print media was terrified. We couldn't go and I couldn't walk into the Wall Street Journal and be like, you guys, you're gonna have to start blogging. This is just gonna have to be done. The internet's coming. And they'd be like, get the hell, like, who the hell are you? But you know what? Let them just sit there in their like fancy Midtown or whatever buildings and like feeling fancy. And then one day they're gonna wake up and be like, what happened? Medium took everybody. We can't sell a newspaper to save our lives. I guess we're over. So I'm not sure we have to like get into moral pleas around things, but we do, I think, have to be very aware of what technology and what our own innovation is enabling us to do next. Whether it's create an atom bomb and hurt ourselves, or like create a blockchain that could only have a dark web and like be a facilitator of human trafficking. Like we still haven't, it's not like our technology is stopping us from having moral corruption at times. But I think hopefully it's helping us refine the conversations of how we want ourselves to be governed. Anyone else?
All right, then I'm gonna go back down the title rabbit hole.
Oh my God, let's go back to title.
So when you put title on a blockchain, you go back and you data entry all previous recorded title records.
I never did. I don't. But I mean, I imagine that's
the idea of what would happen, or
Can I interject real quick here?
yeah.
I think I know where you're going with this, but I mean, after the sale of a property, it's gonna be recorded in the county, it's gonna be recorded in the county where you buy it as well too. And I'm curious if you feel the same, where you're going with this, why the need for title company is, because it's just like Ken was saying. It's all gonna be filed, Ken, right? Is it Ken?
Keith.
Sorry, Keith. I'm sorry. Maybe. I knew. Hey. Right. But it's all just a file system. But once you purchase a property, it goes into the county registry. I mean, as a being, like if you look up, I just bought a property in St. Petersburg from this island. I never set foot in my property. I literally bought a condo, sight unseen, from here with a great agent. And I had to go through all the processes, and I had to do everything over the internet. I did all my electronic signatures, my title, everything, my appraisers, everything. So I guess where I'm going with this is that a major concern with the title part of it? Because once you purchase a property, it's going to be recorded in that county as well as the sale as well.
So sales of real estate are rarely missed on title insurance.
Yeah.
Or title records, right? What's missed often is, you know, you're at the poker game and you say, you know, give me $50,000. I want to keep playing. Your buddy Joe says, all right, I'm going to keep playing. You sign a napkin that says, you know, you've got a lien against my house, right? And Joe folds up the napkin, puts it in his pants, and goes home. And his wife finds him because you're playing poker again, takes the napkin, and it never gets recorded, right? So the lien never gets perfected, but the loan was made. Title insurance, when you then sell your house, and I forgot the names I used, Joe's wife comes back and says, hey, that seller owed me $50,000 against this house, and I want to collect my money, then that title insurance helps resolve some of those issues. Or if, maybe a better example would be a mechanics lien, because those have a higher legal standing than just a personal loan. So you call a plumber while you're in escrow, and the plumber comes out and fixes the plumbing system, but you never pay the plumber. So the plumber legally has a mechanics lien on that property that should be paid before you transfer title to the new person. and the seller doesn't pay their plumber, the plumber still owed that money and it never got recorded anywhere. So what I'm curious is how does having that record on the blockchain versus a county recorder's office change the accuracy of the information? How does that make it any safer? And how does it make title insurance any less relevant? That's
Well, from what I'm understanding, the titles get cloudy because of a lack of information. For example, sorry. So, from my understanding, titles get cloudy because of a lack of information or lack of transparency about information. So and so did such and such poker game. It never got recorded. We don't know. They come forward at the point of sale, and now we have to clear up this issue. And that's where title insurance comes in. If the title's held on blockchain, all of those microtransactions, if we can call them that, happen in blockchain. So there's a running record. So you can't have a cloudy title. It's all recorded in runtime.
So essentially that would mean if we adopted a blockchain title legally and that became the only official title, then there's no way to not pay the plumber
Exactly.
or not pay record the $50,000 loan because it's going to be done in your wallet and
Exactly.
it's going to be done. And the other consumer, the person who didn't know that
It would be their
There's
their
no way they don't
SOL because they didn't know that that
So they
written
would
piece
be able
of
to see
paper.
it. It would be a part of
It
it.
No, I'm saying is
literally
if
be-
it wasn't
they would
done
own the
on the
blockchain.
chain, it wouldn't be valid. It wouldn't be valid.
Yeah.
So it requires all consumers to get
So
used to
when
a new
you
way.
go and do that work on that house and then you don't get paid by the guy, you go in front of all of the town square and you say, "You guys, here's what happened. Here's my lien," and it's like that's on the blockchain and now everybody knows.
It
Got it.
essentially puts those people in second position in a mortgage.
Yeah.
How would you envision that actually happening? And I'm thinking more of the poker game example. Like would everyone have a common app that's relative to what assets they have that are recorded on the blockchain? So
I don't
can-
see that being legal for a very long time, honestly, for people. But if you were to have something like that and be able to wouldn't you just be selling rather than writing out a napkin? You would just be selling some of your tokens. I mean,
Yeah,
go
you
into your
put it on
E-Trade
your phone.
account and get rid of your Apple stock, or go into your house account, get rid of some of those tokens, or whatever.
So if you had a combination of real estate title on a blockchain plus tokenization of assets, then it'd be super easy, right?
Right,
Poker
exactly.
game, I want to keep playing. I just transfer my tokens. And that's the end.
Yep. I mean, it just becomes another one of your assets that's more liquid. Yeah.
Crazy idea that you can actually control your own store of value. Do what you want with it.
I just want to know if I'm playing poker.
And that works for debt and equity.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just like how you could, there are people that they do debt funds. They just deploy debt in real estate. That's what they do. This is what their rates are. This is what they look for. Whether it's a single family mortgage or it's a huge construction loan, right, for a planned community. They're debt people, they're debt partners. They come in for a certain percentage based on loan to value. Like all those things are well known. No need to change all of that. It would just be a matter of those folks have tokenized that, so then more people can come and syndicate into and invest into that lending fund, which I think would be great. If all of you guys wanted to pool your crypto and make a lending fund so that people can get loans more easily down here, it would be really, really cool. That would be very nice. That would be somebody a gift to Puerto Rico and to all of us. But there's also, it's just the same as coming in on the equity side, It's just the equity side, you're taking more risk, of course, you might have more upside. The debt side, less risk, less upside.
How does it work for managing any of this? Are you starting to? Yeah.
You got to the real meat of it. I was gonna get off so easy until you said something.
Yeah, like the example you gave in LA, it's a super cool example. So it's now 4 units in one building, but it's co-owned by N number of people.
Yeah.
But I ended up being the head of my HOA when I owned a condo. It was hell.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was hell. I didn't get paid for it.
I know a good therapist for that. That's awful.
How do you think about that?
So what I've come to, my personal opinion on this is in all of these things where we now have got this revolutionizing technology to be able to transact and handle just the pure financial numbers of things come together. It's great. The next 5 years are going to be very exciting. But what's not really being addressed yet, and I would love to see the people that do want those headaches to do it, I think property management companies can really have a huge opportunity to expand into fiduciary management managers, right? So fiduciary duty people. where we handle your plumber. So you want to buy this place, you want to co-invest in it, great. Use it under our umbrella. So Rise, my company, will take care of the tokenizing of it. We hook in. Who's going to maintain that all of the property stays in good shape? Well, so and so X company does. Okay, and then what about collecting of the rents? Well, that's a property manager's thing to do. Sure. Well, what about distribution of dividends? Because the whole thing is cash flowing positively. They can do that too. So now if they just want to build in the financial part of it, so kind of the stuff that the HOA would do, but hopefully not in this laborious way, because now it would be a company that has one sole purpose of making sure the entire thing works the best it can work as one entity. So not a bunch of owners coming together to bicker over their shit. No, sorry, if you're going to co-invest with this, you don't get a huge say in the governance of these day-to-day things because frankly it's inefficient. And we're going to have better returns if we just have this externalized company, charge us a little bit of money, which kind of goes back to the REIT conversation. How many management fees do you want in there? But when you can justify a management fee for property managers and a management fee for the fiduciary management, I think those are pretty legit. I can see potentially was it FINRA or was it CFTC? Somebody had to come in and basically be like, REITs, you have to give more of your profits back to the people. This isn't okay. There's a limit. There's a quota. You have to meet it. Stop it. I hope that that's not ever the case with co-investing in blockchain because it's just so transparent that someone would be like, wait, we don't need 8 extra percentage points taken off every year for what, And that you wouldn't even get into that equation because it would have been set up properly. Yeah.
How do you address the situation, when you remove ownership from decision making? I think of a situation like when an asset goes into receivership.
I think of it like when I bought Amazon stock.
Or when someone's in trust. For you as a small owner in Amazon, yes. But ownership, large blocks of ownership are still very actively having a seat at the table.
Oh, you're thinking
and
about a GP
overseeing
LP
governance.
Right.
But when you remove that and you put a third-party professional service hired just to manage the fiduciary aspect or the operational aspect, and you have like a receivership or you have a trust manager, there's a situation that happens sometimes where those entities begin making decisions not for the best interest of the collective ownership or the trustee, but rather, or the beneficiary of the trust, but rather for their own continued existence, right? Oh, we don't want to do that investment, it's too high risk.
Yeah, the best way that I've found to make that happen is say if you want to be, you have to have skin in this game. So you have to co-invest with us. If you're going to be the managing property management, you will only be given the authority that would be for the betterment of the whole, and you have to co-invest with us. Or how about this? A portion of what you make on your percentage points for your performance points each year, a portion of that goes back in terms of equity purchase of the property, and the fact that you're at that table taking that over means that someone's going to have liquidity every year, and we're going to be able to shed some of this to either a new owner or whatever. So you will be coming in as a buyer. But either way, to get them to the table so that there's no longer there's a division of responsibility, so you can be more hands off as a consumer and as an investor. I think that's important, but also a division of responsibility that brings them in and makes them have to and aligns their interests with the interests of the other investors, because that's what's really been missing too. Is every intermediary is there to keep their job. We haven't really done a good job of governing ourselves to align our incentives to work together. And the more we can blur these lines and overlap, the better we're going to actually be incentivized to work as a whole.
Questions?
What's the SEC?
Yeah.
I have well, there are some management companies starting now that are actually including like doing plumbing and offering not just like getting somebody in your house, but like doing all the maintenance. So I would see that it would be, there is companies that way, and the competition is what would keep them doing what they're supposed to, because they don't want to lose that contract or that to somebody else that can do it.
But how do they lose the contract? So if you have
It has to be
100
built in.
owners,
They-
and how do they determine, you have this tiny fractional interest in your fourplex, and they're not doing a great job. How does anyone know that they're not doing a great job?
well, the people, if there's going to be people living there, they're going to know, they're going to complain.
Well, the bottom line, you're going to watch the return go down. 'Cause
Anybody
people
that
will
has
move out.
money in it, they want to, if suddenly they're not getting equity or something's happening, they're going to start asking questions. Like, there's multiple checks and balances of places. If people aren't getting paid, suddenly, like, the city's not getting their money for X, Y, or Z, or the plumber went out and they didn't get their money, they're going to complain. Because, again, there's a lot of different ways.
And this
you're
goes
gonna
back to
find out.
smart contracts. You have a smart
Right,
contract
build
with
it
them.
in.
Everything's being tracked on the blockchain, so you know
Exactly.
very quickly.
Yeah,
Whereas
you see it at that
traditionally,
time.
And
so part of
everybody
the
knows
issue
who
takes a long
everybody
time to take
is
a year
that's
to know
involved.
somebody's doing a crappy job managing. Here, you know very fast.
So I just keep hearing the concept of what is the SEC going to
Yeah.
say about this?
That's
How, you know, and even with regard to leads, like how would that even be possible in a smart contract? If you were a mechanic, you needed to place a mechanic's lien, how would you do that on a smart contract? So
Okay, if there's like an
what's the
apartment
SEC
building that's
gonna say?
owned right now and like it's a special purpose vehicle and there's like 5 people that own it, they each own 20% and they're all gazillionaires. I say this like with this idea of this tall building because I'm in New York all the time and I'm like, $10 million building, yet another one I could never buy until this platform is approved into New York, right? But you know, that can happen all the time, and if there's a mechanic's lien, it goes against the title of that property, and those guys eventually have to work it out when they sell or whatever.
If your plumber has a wallet, right? Like,
Right.
so the challenge is like I have trouble getting plumbers who will work for anything other than cash or maybe a check in
PayPal.
Puerto Rico. Like when I'm like, oh yeah, can I PayPal you? Can I Venmo you?
Yeah,
And
the
like,
underbanked is a big problem. I mean, there's a lot of people in the blockchain space that are only focusing on the underbanked. Even in like certain regions, they're like, we just do the underbanked in, you know, Latin America. That's all we do. And there's a lot to do to
Yeah.
bring people together to be able to be financially, you know, kind of accelerate financial inclusion.
I agree with what you said before. I mean, it's really smart for that one firm to focus. I'm not like such a fan of title insurance. Just so you guys know, I'm not like advocating. I'm trying to understand, but
Oh my
it's
God.
smart of them to start with that because it's like you do need to just kind of take over one piece of the space and show people how that works. Because like if you try to come in and build this comprehensive blockchain transaction, you don't have the other players ready to.
The whole, I mean, like you know, being early is a lot like being wrong, you know? And it's like, oh no, that's never gonna work. I'm gonna go back to what I'm normally doing. Like I've heard that a million times. How many people, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But over time I was like, no, it's just early. So I'll build it, I'll let it sit there, and I'm gonna wait for them to come. Like they're gonna come, they'll eventually happen. Either people are gonna want to diversify out of crypto and they're gonna want to talk to someone who understands where they're coming from and sees the value of this and thinks it's at least like novel, if not brilliant. Or there's going to be people that are just going, you know, like in New York especially, just traditional real estate investor guys who goes, wait, there's more money there? Wait, you can make me more money? Of course, like they just sniff out money, right? So the incentives are there. It just takes a while. And I think, you know, eventually the incentive will be there for someone to be like, well, I do property management, but I'm losing out on this market capture over here of these fractionally owned places because they won't work with me until I do fiduciary stuff too. Well, what does that mean? I have to hire an accountant? Fine. I'm one accountant away from having bigger market capture. I'm going to do it, right? So I think like the economy itself moves itself as you bring in the right little incentives to kind of attract what you want.
I appreciate you getting into the nitty gritty because it's, what do they say? The devil's in the details, right? It's like, how do you actually, like even just, if you have a property manager who takes on the fiduciary aspect, I'm going, I don't want my property manager being my fiduciary. I want them in an adversarial relationship, right? Just from my personal set of shoes and whatnot.
So then,
you know, so then you think like, and you can structure those things and then kind of present a comprehensive ecosystem to some investment partners. Because what I'm really interested in is, it might have been before you got here, is how, you know, actually doing a transaction where the parties, you know, a sample transaction, right? And completing every step of the process, even if it's just this one little ecosystem, you know, and working through those details, because I think it's those case studies that are going to help people understand this really can be done.
Oh, yeah.
You know, otherwise it's very ethereal. You know, it's like, no, we did it right here. Here's the address. Here's the title insurance. Here's the investor payouts. Here's the capital stack. Like, you know, have you guys completed many transactions beginning to end?
Not many, no. There's not been a lot of people that fully get it. We were talking with
What
actually.
kind of transactions are you talking about?
Tokenizing real
I
estate.
walked in late.
Oh, co-investing in real estate, fractional ownership of
So
real estate.
fractional ownership of real estate, but
Yes.
most fractional ownership
success stories have a strong management team, have an absolute plan ahead of time.
Yep.
Usually the person who's in the management role is the guy who set up the whole thing, did the development, has kind of an ironclad control of it. And that's why that fractional ownership works, is because Siegel decided that timeshare was going to be the thing in Central Florida, and he kicked ass at it.
Yeah.
Without Siegel, it never goes. It doesn't work.
Well,
You
timeshare
have
and fractional
52
ownership
people
are two
owning
different
52
things,
weeks
right?
trying to decide what to do with this shit.
Yeah, I mean, he
crazy.
tackled something else. We're not talking about fractional ownership in terms of fractional occupancy.
No, he means the investors.
I'm
but
just
he's-
talking about an
Yeah.
investor relationship
Yeah.
to a particular asset,
For sure.
and the
And that's
need for
why-
strong management and
Yeah,
as an investor, it sounds like a disaster to me to have hundreds of small investors trying to tell me as an owner-operator what I'm going to do, and I would assume you're sitting there thinking the same thing. There's no way.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I'm really wrestling with it because I do think there's a way. I want to see a way. And I have all those same emotional reactions, right? But I'm trying to like check my past experience and say that's not necessarily predictive of future results.
And I want the liquidity of it. I think that it could be amazing.
So,
but I don't like the idea
the
of everybody having this
decentralization of
vote type
decision
thing.
making.
That's just not the way the world works.
But
I'm sorry.
I wonder, and you
I
said
mean,
this before.
the aristocracy and throughout all of Britain didn't like the idea of people no longer being excited to live under their houses either, but they eventually did because the economy moved on. And now we have things like democracy, and it works out pretty great, and like print media hated, let's recap real quick. Print media hated like the invention of the internet and all the communication, the decentralization of that. And guess what? They're kind of dead. It's too dead for them.
Monika, I love the idea.
Yeah.
And we talked over there, it's like a private place thing. I love the idea. It's innovative, new technology, it's gonna work. I'm in.
Yeah,
It's a great idea.
let's do it.
Hey, I'm in too. I have some concerns. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't in.
It's a great question. It's like Dax and Downs.
One of the things you said though is that you can, guys, let's do one question at a time. But one of the
Everyone
things,
starts talking amongst themselves. That's a good sign.
one of the things you said though is that you can maintain a GPLP structure using blockchain. So it's not mandated that you give up an appointed decision maker that's a sponsor with a vision and an ultimate responsibility just because you migrate to the platform.
Right, it's
But I
about
think
ownership
that's,
management.
yeah.
It's a tool.
I was involved in publishing when 1 minute publishing changed
Right.
digital, and the whole world changed in an hour. Right? And then all of the companies that were existing in any way, shape, or form in the old way were completely obsolete. So I think there has to be something about this, about getting ready for what you're talking about, being prepared for, having the right system to
Well, it is a nascent
accommodate
space,
this new owner,
This
but
will
not
happen.
manager. This is a new owner, not a manager, I think.
Yeah.
I think.
I think a good way to, like, what I want to make sure some of our questions don't seem like negative. It's more like having done this and being in the space. It's like, we want this. So we really have a vested interest in going, let's think through everything that could go wrong. Let's prepare for that breakdown so there's an answer to those questions. It's not like, hey, we think this is a bad idea. We're here because we think it's a
You
great
can still
idea.
transact using blockchain. You can leave your title right where you left it before. You don't have to do that. You know what I mean? Like you can
But
pick
you
and
still have to
choose.
deal
This
with
is
the
just one of the
SEC
tools that you
issue.
can now
You
follow.
still have to handle the SEC.
But I wonder on the SEC.
There's still going to be the government issue here until it changes.
Well, there's nothing
So
that
how
really
do you
has
get-
to change. It's just a matter of, at some point, yes, when you take something and you break it into lots of small enough shares, you are basically securitizing an asset. When you securitize an asset, you have to follow certain rules, which is why I got all my securities licenses and all, so I can know what those rules are by the back of my hand. And that's why I wrote Blockchain 101, so that I would not have things explained to me that I already had written about. I could say, would you like to read my book? And it was just so much easier to just do that. So I really wanted to make sure I understood the compliance issues behind this. Especially being like a woman in a room full of like mostly investment banker men. So it just seemed to be helpful.
Very smart. But it's one thing to know the issues, it's another thing not to have.
Yeah, it's true.
Right.
And I mean, ultimately, when you securitize a property, yes, the problem is right now the biggest hurdles are the types of filings, what it can cost legally just to get through your legal due diligence and file a Reg D. And a Reg D allows you to have accredited investors and up to 35 unaccredited. And that's usually enough. Like if you have one building of $10 million, you think you want more than 35 people in all? I don't know, maybe not. So why don't we just look at what we already have as a vehicle? Reg CF is one, it caps you as to how much you can raise. Reg D is another, it has a different cap, sometimes it's unlimited, and there's a certain number of investors and types. Another one's Reg A, but it's just so enormously expensive, it's very difficult to see it get through. But you have the tools at your disposal to be completely in compliance. It's just, the problem is, say with the Reg A, the cost of that capital is enormous, that it just eats too much into, the cost of capital is too high. You get cheaper capital without doing it this way now. And that's one of the ways, to your point, in the back where you were saying, what do we do about the powers that be, like throwing as much restrictions up as possible to stop this? Those are just, I think, that's the only tool they have is to try to slow what is obviously a tide. They built a couple of jetties, they're gonna be a hassle, they're gonna slow things down, we have to play by these arcane rules, it will increase the cost of capital for now, and slowly it will be either, Reg A's will become templatized, that could be, why not? It's just it's a real estate offering, plug in the number, put it into a form, make a 60-page Reg A, an easy click to sign and submit process, right? And they could just slow down how long it takes them to review it. Who knows? But it's happening. The tide's already there. It's just a matter of us, like you were saying, thinking through the details, systematizing as much as we can, and just fighting the good fight within the rules that are there, and watching those rules kind of slowly give us more room.
I got a couple questions.
What's up, dude?
Yeah. One would be, is there a back of the envelope cost for the technical side, the technical legal side of this tokenization process as a per deal cost? So for example, if you're doing a $10 million transaction, is it 1%, 2%, something like that?
I mean, I have a target of what I'd like it to be, but it's not playing out the way I would ultimately like. I think ultimately having a flat 2% transaction fee would be fantastic. That's what I always target it for. I think it's enormously generous. It works out well. It cuts out as many intermediaries as possible. It doesn't totally disrupt all of the intermediaries, such as real estate agents if they want to find a way to be in there or whatever. Fine. It doesn't disrupt capital too much. It's kind of an origination fee. It's not a big deal. It is too cheap given what you have to do legally to get the first few through. Which is why a startup model in terms of fundraising is required for a blockchain company. I'm a big bootstrapper myself. This is my fourth company. I've bootstrapped all of them until this one. And raising the money to be not profitable yet is it turns my stomach to have to tell you that we're not profitable yet. I'm like, what a jerk off am I that I run a company that's not even profitable? That's just stupid. That's ridiculous. It's not a company. That's called a hobby, Monica. That's what I think. But because of these things, because it's such an innovative new technological space, this is why capital works the way it does in startups. They overfund to get you through that point, to get enough groundswell to then get over those first hurdles that could have otherwise just starved you out. And so rather than get starved out, I just decided to take my foot off the gas and wait until the people came and wanted to hear more about it and found the right use cases, rather than plow in and fight every fight and lose my shirt doing it. So,
Good.
yeah.
So, question two. So I feel like everything we talked about tonight has been amazing, frankly, super interesting. But it's all been in kind of the context of looking at a deal getting done on a syndicated basis, effectively. So I'm curious to talk about kind of what would be more of a standard institutional type of joint venture equity structure that you might see on, say, a larger development project, where you have one single partner that's bringing the majority of the project equity, call it 90%, something like that, and you don't run afoul, or I'd say really have to worry about any SEC issues because they do have some control points.
Yeah.
So it's not purely passive equity.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious what you think about taking this same discussion around this technology that's coming, but applying it to that scenario where was SEC concerned.
Where that doesn't mean it necessarily has just securitized a property because it didn't reach a certain threshold or a certain amount of control wasn't given up by
Well, I guess I'm thinking more of taking that kind of standard institutional transaction structure and executing that on a blockchain basis with smart contracts.
Yeah, honestly, that's totally doable. I think the only question there becomes where is exactly the threshold where we call that a securitization play and not. And that's just for FINRA's rules. But yes, those smart contracts would be easily and really put to good use in that scenario for those reasons. for sure. That's an easy one, a no-brainer. The only reason that hasn't been a first early adopter of this type of technology, because clearly there are enough working pieces in these larger syndicates that they would want this, except they have the money to pay the intermediaries and all the legal as it exists, and they're very comfortable where they are. And so that's why they're not early adopters. Early adopters are usually people that don't have a better option, they're scrappy, or they're brave, or they're just curious.
Well, institutions are fiduciaries. So, like, if you're right, you're the smartest fiduciary on the planet. If you're wrong, you're in jail, right? So there's like this sort of risk aversion for Goldman Sachs to be like, yeah, we're going to put this pension fund into this transaction. Because I think, yeah, it's a logical place.
They'll follow, but those are the they're the end of the tail, right? They're not that really.
But I think what you're saying is if you're not doing it from a capital perspective, you take the capital conversation off, and you're just talking about tokenizing the steps in the process, the acquisition,
I don't even know if
title.
tokenize is the right word, maybe more just putting all that on the blockchain as far as executing it through those smart contracts.
Okay.
So there's probably some interesting things to talk about from just an efficiency of
And a
transaction,
governance.
assuming that infrastructure, is ready, available, exists, and is relatively simple to take advantage of.
Is it? I mean, like, if we were gonna buy a property and we wanted to tell our tenants, we're gonna sign the lease on the blockchain, we're gonna monitor your payments on the blockchain, we're gonna, like,
It would make no
that's-
difference to them because they just send a check to wherever they send it, or they send a payment however they send it, right?
And then that all could be done like.
Yeah,
like,
you
all
could
that
do
tech
that.
exists now.
Yeah.
Like, if we had a deal right now, we could just use a sample, like it's all set up and ready to go.
Your proof case is materializing as we
I
speak.
know,
so
right?
just,
Yeah, let's talk about this space here. That sounds pretty cool. Yeah.
I think we're thinking the exact same thing.
But I think to your tenants, they're going to be like, are you asking me to pay in Bitcoin? Like, they won't know what the hell you're talking
Right.
about. It'll be the same thing operationally to many pieces of that puzzle already. It might be new to certain or. You're thinking. I can tell. All right. Is that it? Any more questions?
Fantastic. What other questions? No? These were great.
How do we connect with you outside of this group?
Well, I have a phone and I have business cards.
Okay.
Actually, just to keep it old school.
And you can find her in the town square.
You can find me in the But that's a whole different business. That's a whole different business.
What's the name of your company and your business?
Oh, Rise Markets.
Rise Markets?
Yeah.
Rise. Great talk, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.